Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my channel Science to Technology. In today's show, Camera Tuesday, we're gonna talk about what exactly is the deal behind a raw video. So let's dive right into it. Now first you have to understand what exactly is the problem that we need something advanced tool as raw video. Well, our world has way too much data because here's the deal. You may think our world has colors, few colors if you want to study rainbow, but here's the deal, we have way more color than you may be like few million, no, few billion. Well, to be fair, actually infinite in entirety of visual spectrum, because it's about a wavelength system. There is no exact hard line like there is this color or this color or this color, so it has way too many options. On top of that, our eyes perceive color differently, meaning one person would observe the world completely differently to another. Red will look red to someone to look orange to someone, and we will have no way of comparing it. So reality is our real world throughput is too goddamn high, meaning our eyes. However, that being said, we had negative. Now negative had some good technology. For example, it was very good to make very high resolution, because all you had to do is make it bigger for higher resolution. That's why, like, if you want to go 70 mm or IMAX of that time, you will have like a lot of Panavision movies. Or most amazing movie was Apollo landing. Basically, they captured it into 70 millimeter Panavision format, and it's amazing. You will have never seen Neil Armstrong in actual 4K. That actually looks crisp. So you could have done that, and it had amazing dynamic range. However, our digital sensor, while it was lagging behind, but it slowly started capturing resolution, and at this point in time you can easily exceed the resolution of a negative, meaning you physically, fundamentally, will have more dynamic range. Like if let's say negative gives you 14 or 15 stop, this puppy will easily give you 16 to 17. So we can achieve that. That's doable now. Resolution flat out. Many times people have this misconception, is like we can just scan it more higher and higher. Still, that's not how it works. That's why we had like 8mm looked like 8mm, 16 looked a bit better, 35, now we are talking 70. Oh yeah, there is a reason for that. Like you had to make it bigger. It was not very infinite in resolution. Oh, we're gonna scan it. If you try to do that, all you're gonna get is film grain, nothing more than that. However, our digital sensor now can beat it in terms of dynamic range, in terms of resolution, and low light. It was always awesome. Low light is mind-bogglingly awesome in terms of negative sensors. It's like it's flat out night vision compared to film setups. So our capture equipment has now reached a point where it's like it can capture a lot, but on top of that, issue is our display is limited, meaning even if a camera is capturing GG amounts of, let's say, 1 GB per second data, your display can only output like, let's say, 500 MB. Now 500 is too high. Let's say 100 Mbps per second. It's too constricting. Now people try to solve this by utilizing HDR. Now it is much better compared to the SDR option. There is no comparison in that. However, it's still too goddamn slow, meaning the sensor, what is actually capturing, is too wide. Basically, the pipe that is coming out of the sensor is too fat. And that creates an issue for camera. It's like, how the heck I give you a file that you can see? Because here's at the end of the day, there is a limitation. If you can't see it, it's pointless to capture. It's like if your monitor cannot render it, cannot display it, what's the point of capturing it? Now you may say I can recover it or do it, or like, but at the end all you are doing is basically taking a huge bandwidth and trying to compress it to work for that limited output. So that created a solution. That solution was like, sensor, rather than capturing everything under the sun, just capture the things that you can actually show or render it out. So every camera has quote unquote look. What they are doing is basically taking the data, processing it, and giving you a limited file output. So they are trying to do a lot of things. For example, mapping. They are taking 16-bit values, because the generally analog to digital converter that converts sensor to electrical signal, they are 16-bit. That is a lot of value, and they are like generally trying to package it to 10 or 12 or sometimes 8. Most of the time, most of the camera is generally doing 8-bit. You can find some that does 10 and some that does 12. 10 and 12 is more than good enough for HDR. So you will do that mapping, because you will not try to directly package a 16-bit file. You will directly package it to 12, 10 or 8. And they also have to make it into a color image, because here's the sensors are black and white. Inherently your sensors are black and white. So if you actually take the sensor without deburring it, you have nothing there. You just have black and white, unless you're talking about a 3 sensor system which is used for 8K broadcasting of Olympics, where they have RGB. So in that scenario, you have the luxury of like, okay, this black and white is for R, this black and white is for G, this is black and white was for R. There, instead of deburring, you just have to layer it. But most of the sensor you have to deburr it, so the images needs to be colored. So that's the problem. Basically, we have a very fat pipe from the sensor, but the output, because of the limitation of the basically display technology, is clamped. We just clamp that down. So what does this RAW actually looks like? What does it mean? Well, it simply means it does allow, in some scenarios, better future algorithms. Meaning, let's say you captured it, let's say for Matrix in 1999 they captured it. Again, they used negative system, but for some scenes, if they had used digital films and they have captured the raw and they saved the raw, they could have re-rendered those old scenes, meaningfully in camera plates, and they can re-render it out and they will have better quality, because you have a real world scene, you have a DVR algorithm, and then it creates a raw data. However, that raw data is processed through demosaic method. That can change. You can have a better scenario where you think of it this way, like how our mobile phone magically became like so good in last 3 years. They are getting better because this demosaic algorithm is becoming tangibly better. You can literally take, and that's why many times you will notice that the professional photographer, they are very serious about preserving the raw files. That's the reason, because raw files are inherently black and white, meaning it can be reprocessed. For example, Leica, if you have very early Leica digital cameras, you take the footage, you take the back in that day, like let's say in early 2000, you did that, you take the image, you processed it, you had a final output, and you did that same raw file. Now you will have much better output because this algorithm part has become much better. That's why those files become quote unquote timeless. Meaning, if you have that 16-bit, it's almost like having that digital negative where you can reprocess this again and again with better and better system, and you'll get a lot more oomph out of it. Especially at higher resolution, when you're talking about like modern digital sensors that are like 6K or 8K, you're talking GG amounts of data that in future a proper AI algorithm going through this is going to give you magic output on the other end. However, that simply means that's the first task. If you take a raw file, you have to color the goddamn raw file. So basically, black and white sensor data has to be converted from demosaicing algorithm and then gives you the basically color. But that's the first thing you have to do if you get a raw file. Again, it's not something you and I do. It's somebody who builds the program does that, or in some scenarios you will get some control over it, because some company does try to have some weird things. For example, Fuji, instead of using normal known bear pattern, they has a custom pattern of their own, X-Trans, I think. Again, you can find some scenarios where they have a bit different, but again, you can even experiment with that. Like you can have the black and white. It's like, what if I apply Fuji system? It looks like this. More or less they will look the same, especially with high megapixel, but you can still find some unique results out of that. That's the first step. RAW does not have the color data. It does not have denoising algorithm, and that is one thing you have to understand. A sensor basically is idiotically noisy. The only reason you don't notice the imaging performance is getting better in our all this life, basically from your mirrorless camera to your camera phones, is simply because there is a small section of the sensor that is dedicated just for noise measurement. So your big fat pipe from the sensor, it's noisy AF. That noisy AF goes to digital to analog converter. That analog gets converted that data. Okay, everything is awesome. But yes, there is a small patch, and you will find that like in DxO mark and back in the days, you will always notice like the real pixel count was different versus active pixel count. The deactivated pixels, they are used as a basically noise generator. Now you're like, why? Well, sensor have a noise that is proportional to the temperature. How do you know the temperature? Basically take the data from, like, basically if sensor is a bit bigger, then it's supposed to be little bit, only few pixels bigger, again a few pixels in and few pixels in Y, and they will capture you the central data, and these species are like blocked out. Basically they do not have photon input in them. Based on that, they get an electrical noise pattern of that camera at that point in time. Basically, what is the battery level, what is the radiation level in that area, radiation is the ultraviolet, all that you have that noise pattern. Then the processor removes that. Okay, this is supposed to be the noise pattern, this is the noise pattern in my image, cancel it out. Ta-da! Noiseless image. Awesome, but it does make image look a bit more lifeless, because again, noise is the part of the nature. So many people don't like this, especially Zack Snyder. If you notice, like especially in big TVs or something even bigger than this, you will notice that Zack Snyder movies have like really high noise pattern, and I have a very bad feeling that he just does not let the denoising algorithm run. Like, because you have to do some denoising. It's like nope. And if you want the worst case scenario of like denoising is gone to the extreme, watch the re-release of Lord of the Rings in 4K. They denoise the hell out of it. Like everybody looks like a wax. Then you have edge refinement. That is also a very critical aspect, because a camera knows for a fact that not every noise is the same value. Basically, noise at the center is not that valuable because it has a clear contrast pattern. So there is an algorithm that detects where to direct my bits. Basically, like this area, please focus on that. For example, in this frame that you are seeing right now in the camera, for this frame you are seeing this area will be very high focus, because camera knows for a fact that this is hairy, or what we call noisy area. In that noisy area, it's like, hey, this area needs much more detail. It's gonna give that. Like this area flat, it does not care too much. So that is also a step. Then you have white balance, because it has such a wide point in 16-bit value that is like, dude, we need to map this puppy. we need to map this properly. You need that white balance point, and then you also need color space mapping, because you can no actual delivery format has that kind of bandwidth right now. Most of the time you have to have Rec 709, which is very limited 8-bit, or you can have like a 12-bit or 10-bit of BT 2020. Then you have to map the colors. Then you also have to do tone mapping, which is basically brightness management. You have heard these things becoming very popular in HDR circles, where they are looking about, oh, it's 500 nit movie. Why the heck movie have a nit rating? That's why, like, it's supposed to be mapped properly. If it's not mapped properly, you will have a bright scene, but it does not go very bright. And that's why you will see people talking about, like, professional HDR grade monitor supposed to go as high as 4000 nits. That's why, like, if you don't have a monitor that can render it out, how the heck you will see whether you are mapping it properly? Basically, sunshine supposed to go to like a maximum or supposed to go to 4000 nits or 3000, again depending on you. You have to give a creative freedom there, because you may be like, hey, this is a romantic, wow, this is a dour scene, I do want to show that, like, character is draw. And that's why, like, we have Dolby Vision, where it does the handshake, where it's like, hey, please tone down the overall brightness of the image, because, like, character is sad, like, even though there is sunshine outshore, it does not show. Then it's like very happy, in love, and you want to, like, raise the brightness. These are subtle things that people do, but it does translate to a lot, and all that becomes your headache if you try to deal with raw file. Everything from coloring the goddamn file to removing the noise from it to do edge refine. Again, this part is not necessary, especially very high megapixel sensors, and white balance, color mapping, tone mapping, all these becomes your headache if you are dealing with raw files. Now, how do we get this raw file? Well, this is where things get extremely muddy, because there are generally compressed and uncompressed option. Now we're like, wait a minute, isn't raw simply by definition means uncompressed? Well, no. I mean, like, anybody who have worked with basically modern DSLRs or mirrorless, they have noticed, like, even raw has options, compressed or uncompressed. Same happens in video industry, because a flat out raw file is uneditable. It's not a video file. There is no format that can truly contain. It's not compressed. It's like, it does not even have color information. So how the heck you gonna do it that? Again, and there are some formats like cinema DNG format that if you actually try to look at it, it's just still files. Every 24 still files per second if you are shooting at 24 fps, 60 fps, 60 still shots if you want to shoot in that. Like, literally every scene is a complete raw file. So you get that idea. It's not easy as like, okay, Control C, Control V, play the file. It does not work. It's impossible to direct it, because it's not a video file, because it does not have color management or tone mapping. However, some people have come out with a clever idea. Basically, they created much better containers. One of the amazing container is Apple ProRes RAW. That's why you will see every Tom, Dick and Harry was talking about, like, ProRes, we want ProRes. And the reason why you don't get ProRes in every camera is simply because while it can be done, while the processing requirement is not too goddamn high, it is a paid system, meaning Apple has to get some money from you. Meaning Panasonic, Sony, Canon, they do have pro equipment lineup. Those pro equipment can directly give you ProRes, or you can buy some third-party equipment that does give you that option, like Ninja, where it's gonna give you ProRes RAW. However, if let's say, for example, Nikon wanted to do that ProRes RAW, they had to talk to Apple, and it's like, hey, can we do that? Apple was like, of course, just send us $5 million. You get that point. So that's why you don't get it everywhere again. But for pro equipment, it's kind of extra. Even RE Alexa gets you that option, ProRes RAW. Now, it's a container. It's a container that's containing all the raw file. Now, it was built specifically to manage that. So it does have much higher bit depth. It can go upwards of 12, or some scenarios people are talking about like 14-bit, maybe some XR variant. But you get the point. Like, you can type ProRes white paper and you'll get complete spec sheet. It's a video format, but it's designed in such a way that it can manage. Basically, it can digest raw file in raw format. It's not compressing it down, meaning it has lot of option in terms of white balance change, in terms of demosaic algorithm. Basically, it's trying its best to digest the file as it is, rather than toning it, rather than converting it. It's like, I'm doing my best to store as much data as I can. It does work. It's quite amazing. And because Apple has made it, and because it became such a big success, every basically video editor software also works very well with it. So meaning it is a darling of the cinema industry right now. However, it is fundamentally lossy. It's not what you will call true RAW. It's very good, but not true. And looking at the success of that, Blackmagic also introduced their own Blackmagic RAW. Now, Blackmagic is also a very big company, simply because in broadcast industry they are huge, and they are also releasing their own camera, and they have also bought basically DaVinci Resolve. So they have enough skin in the game where they're like, what if we create our own format? We have the whole pipeline which we can support. So they created a new format which almost has the same logic behind us. ProRes, basically it is a container that is doing its best to contain everything. But they looked at the whole pipeline and they're like, dude, not every flavor of RAW is desirable, meaning demosaicing is not something that you truly need. So they're like, what if we mosaic the image, basically give you the color image, and then you go YOLO on it, meaning we'll give you tonal mapping, we'll give you highlight mapping, basically everything that most people do, we'll give you that, but we'll just do some of the things in camera. Benefit, it's not complete RAW, again same as ProRes RAW, but it does have more than enough, meaning you do not have to worry about white balance, you do not have to worry about too much exposure limitation, as long as sensor can do it. Again, if you overexpose it directly, look at the sun, it's not going to give you sunspots. Be mindful of that. There is a limit to that, like physical limit of electron limit of the sensor. As long as inside it, the format will not be the limitation. Oh, it's like my camera compressed it. So they're like these things, like basically luminance value, that needs much more bigger container. Blackmagic RAW, I give you all the data you need. You need a lot more chrominance value, so you can store a lot more color information. I give you all the data you need. How about color data? It's like, yeah, we're gonna compress that puppy because you don't actually need that. So again, what Blackmagic thinks. So it does have some advantages, especially if you are working with Blackmagic equipment and working in basically DaVinci Resolve. So you're gonna get amazing experience for that. But again, still technically what we call compressed. And what you like, I actually want RAW. I want the RAW. I don't want the option, compromise. I want the RAW. You have to go into proprietary software of every goddamn camera manufacturer. That's why, like, if you notice any new camera release, they're like, yeah, we can't actually edit the RAW file simply because the codec pack has not been released. You have to wait for Lightroom to get that codec update. Same happens in video industry. For example, Red, you can't play that file. You have to have Red RAW support. Canon systems, Cinema RAW. Same goes for Sony. Same goes for every company. Basically, they have their own container that they have to custom develop for their own sensors. Now it does work, it is quite amazing, and it can give almost 16-bit of data, but even they realized that in modern sensors is too much useless data, so it's still compressed. You're like, wait a minute, this is true RAW, true 16-bit RAW, then why the heck it's compressed? It's kind of useless. So for example, this is the best amazing chart I have found. This is from Blackmagic. It's like if you have a 4.6K sensor and running at 4K, running at 30 FPS, that if you do nothing, basically data hard drive, you're talking about around uncompressed, no touching, no tampering, no making love to the file. You're talking about 550 Mbps. Let that sink in. That is higher than SATA 3 sustained speed, meaning if you have SATA 3 high-end SSD, it's gonna drop frames. You're gonna need NVMe SSD just to contain that, and that's per second, and that's capital B, not small b, that you get in your mirrorless system. That's capital B. That's huge. That is basically almost 1 GB per 2 seconds or 3 seconds. That is huge file size. Nothing can handle that. So you will see same thing that you will see with Red RAW also. It's like 3:1 compression ratio, 5:1 compression ratio, 8:1 compression ratio, 12:1 compression ratio. Now be mindful, even if I give you 12:1, it sounds bad. This puppy will outsmoke almost anything. Because many times compression is not about how much you are compressing, it's like how much can you recover after decompression. That's what codex means. Codex is compression and decompression. If the compression algorithm is lossless, basically it knows this is the algorithm I'm going to use, and you can use this algorithm to decode it, and you can get almost most of it. Again, will be some loss, but you can get most out of it. It does not matter. That's why, like, you will have people talking about, like, hey, you can have Red RAW, but like don't try to have like record it like 1:1, try to like 3:1 or 16:1. That's the reason. If the codex is efficient enough, it's wise enough, even the data that is throwing away will not have any detrimental effect. So you will have 3:1 that will go up to 183 Mbps, which is used. Then they also have developed a new system. That's why I said, like, Blackmagic had the advantage of looking at ProRes, like what they are doing right, what they could do better. They came up with the idea of basically constant quality. This is the same thing you can find in Blu-rays, especially Blu-rays when they are being mastered. They have a limited space on a disc, let's say 90 GB or 115 GB. They're like, what can we do in this? Let's say movie is long, for example, Watchmen, but they're like, every scene will not have the same requirement. Amazing, they have seen that people are talking in cafe. They don't need too many Mbps for that. They're like, let it tone it down, let's just save some space, and then they're gonna have some action scene. They're like, okay, crank the Mbps. Same idea, constant quality. Because you have to understand, like, let's say you're shooting an action scene, everything is awesome, car is driving, everything is GG, and then goes boom. Now in that boom, again, that boom just happened for 1 second, but basically in that 1 second you will have thousands of flame particles, hundreds of things that are like changing in exposure, because like light, flame effects, and it's a practical effect. Good luck, because that's gonna create a lot of debris that all has to be captured. So it's gonna have increase the bit rate. So it has like a kind of throttle. Basically sensor has a throttle behind it. So it's like, okay, sensor is not giving me data, let's store it at 100. They're like, sensor is giving too much data, 274. So they do this like quality 0 and quality 5 option, like quite amazing option. So this is the magic of basically Blackmagic RAW, and you have to understand that's why, like, even when you are talking about RAW, Red RAW, Cinema RAW, Sony RAW, whatever, blah blah blah, you will always find this compression option, because the decompression does allow you to achieve almost 98% of it. And again, you still don't have 16-bit true display panels. Like, how the heck you gonna display it? So that this is the format complications with a RAW file. So what are the use behind it? Well, this is one of those things that every Tom, Dick and Harry thinks they wanted, but it's not something that you truly actually need. Specifically if you do exposure right. If you mess up the exposure, you're just hoping that sensor actually had the dynamic range to capture it. But again, most of the time, any competent director, they assume they have the worst case scenario. They assume like, I cannot tamper with it. They assume like, okay, this is the shot. This is, especially when they are talking about practical scenes and practical effects. You cannot just like, hey Hemsworth, can you just like, you know, can you allow us to redo the scene? They are like, no. So they work in a such a way that everything is double checked, triple checked. Every exposure, every composition they can do, they make sure they have it right. And the RAW in those scenarios is only done for either a technical reasons or worst case scenario reason. You have to understand. So for common public, most of the time it's not needed for music videos, not needed for TV content, not needed for advertisement, not needed for YouTube. Again, you can do those things if you want to, but again, not desirable. If you have a good quality camera and you have a good mastery of the exposure, 10-bit container with color luminance value of basically 422, meaning color value is 50% of the luminance value. At Rec 2020 container, basically it does have the ability to map all the variables at all frame compression system. Basically, you're not throwing away the frames. You're good. Most of the scenarios, this is good. Again, to give you a contrast, like you can give this to a cinema artist and they can like, we can work with this. Again, it won't be amazing, but they can work with it. And most of the time, even movie industry don't work with raw files. Again, if they need CG plates, they will work their ass off. But if they don't need it, they will not. Like basically romantic movies, generally they are shot in ProRes 4:4:4:4. Yes, there are 4 4s in that. They don't even go with raw. It's just too much work. But again, you're supposed to expose it properly. You're supposed to expose it right in the camera. Not supposed to be like, yeah, let's just mess up the exposure and then we'll try to recover in post. Again, it takes time, it wastes money. And again, if you end up in the same place where you would have been if you have captured directly properly in the camera, why waste time? So be mindful. It is one of those things that is a very niche tool. And log files are generally a good compromise between raw and between what your camera does, because again, most of the time camera can do a very amazing job. It's like what we actually need to see. It does amazing. Like the very clever engineers build their analog to digital converters and the converters to porters, basically that is converting that high bit files to low bit that you need to receive. But however, most of the things that we have issues with is dynamic range, especially in low container sizes. So they're like, log file is a good compromise where they remaps everything, doing its best to preserve as much data as we have from the sensor, and then it's like, okay, you go, you'll own it. It is a very good option because it is a video file. You're not tampering anything with it. It's like, it is a video file. You can apply logs to it and be GG with it. So log files are really good compromise for medium budget work. And true uncompressed, which people are like, RE true uncompressed, or like Matrix when they are talking about like modern cameras, like a truly uncompressed one, that's huge. Truly uncompressed are like huge raw formats, and you have to deal with proprietary formats, meaning if the software company goes bust that made your proprietary raw format, which has happened in the past, good luck. So that's an issue, and it's huge, meaning you can't store these in hard disks. You need servers, and I'm not talking one, you need multiple servers. And now you understand why every Tom, Dick and Harry is talking about like, Avatar was shot in petabytes. That's why. If they are actually trying to store raw file, which again complete CG work, they had to store it. It was huge. So it's a pro tool with pro level demand. Yes, you can do that nowadays, but it's not something that you are like, yeah, awesome. It's one of those things. Is like, again, very good for colorist work. Again, if you want to be a colorist, this is a very amazing tool. Just buy a cheapest camera that can give you raw file, buy Atmos Ninja and learn to color things. Amazing tool for that. But as a day-to-day tool where you're gonna like, I'm gonna deliver wedding videos, not really desirable. Log file, on the other hand, is a really good compromise. It does elevate your video output from compared to others, and it does not have the headache of like, raw files. So be mindful with use. Unless you have boatload of money, then go you'll own it. So this was my presentation on what the heck is this RAW system. Hopefully you have liked it, learned from it. In that case, please click the like button, share it amongst your friends. That will help me a lot. If you didn't like it, didn't enjoy it, I urge you to press dislike. I would also urge you to leave a comment because I do try to reply to all of them. Subscribe, press the bell icon if you're free, and as always, thanks for watching.